I'm Leah Shaver. I'm the president and CEO of the National Transportation Institute. For 26 years, we've been benchmarking driver compensation, technician compensation, best practices, programs, anything that relates to what is important to a company to attract and retain their drivers and technicians, and what's important to drivers by way of demand and how we see that trend in the industry. I also serve on the board of directors of the Women in Trucking Association, the Next Generation in Trucking Association, and I work part-time for SiriusXM's Road Dog Trucking Radio, so I speak with drivers on a regular basis about what's important to them. The show concept is Payday with Leah Shaver. It's about human resources related issues, what really impacts their paycheck and what they want to see delivered on a regular basis by way of pay, benefits, programs, etc.
Rachel, how about Milan?
So I'm Rachel Lovell. I'm the Vice President of People Operations at Milan. I handle everything from HR to recruiting. I've started my career at Milan in 2006, so this is my 15th year. And more than anything, I focus on how can we improve the driver experience from the time that the driver picks up the phone and speaks to a recruiter, from the time they get in the truck, and then their tenure with the company. So my saying is, I want to hire to retire. So that's my main focus. I'm a member of Women in Trucking and the Randall Riley Carrier Advisory Board.
Sergey?
Hi everybody, thank you for having me. My name is Sergey Bort. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Business Development at GP Transco. We're a dry van carrier out of the Chicagoland area, out of Joliet, Illinois, with about 500 trucks, and I'm responsible for all of the branding, the PR, and basically the representation of the company publicly, specifically for driver-facing content as well as for customers. And of course, pay is a big part of that. We pride ourselves in being creative with what we put out and with being transparent with our drivers.
Leah, I want to start with you. I know you've got some data on pay trends, so if you wouldn't mind, kick us off with kind of what you see.
Sure. In supplement to the conversation today about what drivers want, we look at data and how that trends and what it really shows in the story of what's happening in the industry. Drivers, we've heard some feedback from Julie today, and you know, they tell us on air consistently that the inconsistencies in pay, the unpaid, unpredictable and out of their control time when they're out doing the job, that is the biggest aggravation. So when we look at the trend in data then, when you tie it to detention, for example, which has had very little activity over the last 5 years, layover pay, so the unpaid, unpredictable home time when they're away from home, very little activity over the last 5 years, and then guaranteed pay. The numbers are interesting in terms of driver feedback because guaranteed pay exists in probably 30 to 40% of fleets across the country, but they're oftentimes temporary in nature. So when we think of guaranteed pay, we think of, as the driver report there was between 50 and 60 grand a year at a minimum. That would bring in a driver at a median 1 year earnings, by the end of year one. But in terms of making it enough, making it satisfactory, that really doesn't close the gap. The other issue that we have, and this is most significant since about Q3 of last year, is that we market pay at the 90th percentile, but a year one driver starting with a company is going to earn on average about 23.9% less than a full year driver. It takes some time to ramp up. They're getting used to operations. There's a lot of reasons for that gap, but in general, if we market the pay at the 90th percentile to appear attractive and get those clicks and convert a lead, ultimately there's a bit of a gap and disappointment. Now, we did a study a few years ago, and I want you to brace yourself. I'm going to rock your world right now. We did a pay study about pay and turnover, and are you ready? The lower the pay, the higher the turnover. Revolutionary, right? Now, listen, we do surveys by demand, and that's what folks wanted to see. They wanted us to prove that, in fact, the lower the pay, the higher the turnover. It is true. It actually does happen that way. But the other thing about this is there was just a pay study released. It was a joint partnership with 3 universities Colorado State, University of Arkansas, and Penn State. And ultimately, they talked about pay volatility and how it leads to turnover. And the ups and downs, and where does this tie in? It ties in with guaranteed pay, right? If nothing else, our recommendation is that you instill even a transition bonus, fixing the pay for a period of time that generally we see that gap for the first-year driver. But the lower the pay and the higher the volatility, the more likely the driver exits the company. And that's why we see so much turnover in the early days at the company. Now, this is just pay over the last little over, 14 years, 15 years. And, ultimately, we call it the driver wages roller coaster. But the line that I want you to pay attention to is that blue line. Private fleets pay the most consistently, and we've been talking about this at industry seminars for as long as I've been managing NTI, so since 2015. Private fleets have consistency in the pay and in the schedule. Driver knows exactly what to expect. They not only know when they're going to be home, but around the time of day, exactly what the earnings are going to be. There's a transparency in the pay and schedule. And so as you see here, those drivers really don't experience the same roller coaster ride that for-hire fleet drivers do. And here we are, we're on another upswing, pay is on the rise. And the discussion at every leadership team meeting that we have with fleets across the country is, when will the swing fall and what's going to happen with all of the pay increases that we've put in place? So you hear driver feedback that they want regular pay, they want to see guarantees, they want consistency, they want to feel respected in their paycheck. And meanwhile, our conversations are oftentimes what's going to happen when we have to redact the pay increases that we've put in place. You hear drivers want more in the paycheck and less in a bonus plan. That reverts back to the roller coaster ride for drivers. So the magic button for fleets everywhere is ultimately finding what's the perfect match to bring some consistency to the paycheck, even if it's for a period of time, and ultimately stabilize both the company and the expense of replacing drivers. A couple things really quickly here about retaining drivers, and I'm sure we'll talk about this with our fleets, but ultimately, if you want to boost performance, of course, it's important to have incentives that are tied to your KPIs, but then you also need to have a comparison and see exactly how are we doing, how did we get there, where did we miss, and what can we work on in the future. You have to have a protection plan in place so that drivers know exactly what the next step is to achieve in their paycheck. But in terms of meaningful adjustments this year, the most impactful across the industry are addressing those pain points that I talked about related to unpaid and unproductive time. Paying for all miles driven, this is the top thing that drivers ask for that we're missing in the industry. And if you see some leaders in that area, they've identified the gap between paying hub miles and practical miles, between paying practical miles and paying short miles. And so if you're doing any of those things related to the software and what your drivers are doing in terms of their time in the truck or the miles that they're driving, that is an area that you especially want to market. Drivers, when they call in to SiriusXM, it's a live call-in show giving their feedback. They want to be respected by way of advocacy for what they do and communication. They absolutely want pets and passengers. This is vital to them. And actually, I even heard drivers now are calling companies share how many heartbeats are allowed in the truck. I think that's amazing. Women have unique needs and want those addressed by the company. They want retention incentives, not sign-on bonuses. It's absolutely true that drivers are suspicious of sign-on bonuses over $5,000. They want to see how proud you are of what they do because they take a lot of pride in their work. And ultimately, very high on their priority list is not being micromanaged, which ties back to a lot of the technology that we have in the trucks today.
Rachel, tell us a little bit about Milan's pay program.
So our company regional pay program is base pay based upon experience, pay per mile. We pay Rand McNally miles. Oh, is it not going? Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Mic check. So we pay base pay based upon experience. We pay Rand McNally miles, and the pay structure has changed a little bit. I remember when I came into recruiting in 2015, we were paying 36 cents a mile, and I never thought we would see 50 cents a mile, and now I'm trying my best to see how close we can get to the 60 cents a mile. Our regional drivers are home weekly, so we get good home time. We have made an adjustment where we're scheduling out home time, so we market to them, if you leave Sunday, we're getting you home Friday. If you leave Monday, you're getting home Saturday. So trying to tie in how we can get a more predictable schedules has really helped, and then we're trying to see how can we improve our bonuses, how can we improve our accessorial charges. We don't want to make a driver think they're going to incur detention or dwell time, but if you are, we want to make sure that they're covered. So we've seen an improvement and really more focus on those extra charges or those accessorials, including with the base pay.
Sergey, tell us a little bit about GPT's pay program.
Yeah, so our pay program, we still pay by the mile. One of the bigger changes we went through in the past, I'd say year and a half, is shifting away from having more emphasis on a bonus-specific structure and more on a straight up higher CPM. So about a year and a half ago, we were paying drivers about 52 cents a mile, and the accessorial pay and the bonus structure based on safety and performance and everything else would get drivers up to 62, 63, 64 cents. But we saw that a lot of our drivers saw that as a condition that they just didn't like having. Even though when we were looking at the numbers, we saw most drivers were meeting it. So eventually we took the plunge and said, you know what, we're going to stop looking at it as a performance bonus and just go straight to something like 60 cents a mile. And as a result, we did see our retention rate go, or our turnover rate go down from something like 48% to about 35%. So that was pretty significant. We pay for all miles, and we really try to communicate everything that we pay for to our drivers in a transparent manner. If you go on our website, we're very open about everything that you would be paid for as a driver. I noticed when I got into the industry 4 or 5 years ago, one of the strangest things was when I would be doing researches to see what carriers are paying drivers, it would be very difficult to find actual dollar amounts on the websites. So that was one of those easy pickings that I figured we need to be able to do. And today I think a lot of carriers are catching up with that as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about our pay.
Julie had mentioned that there's some, I guess, distrust, and that may not be the right word, but a little distrust when it comes to sign-on bonuses and performance-based bonuses, because for whatever reason, management and the drivers never seem to be on the same page. The driver feels like they hit the benchmark mile, and maybe management feels like it's just a little bit short. So I guess my question for each of you would be, do you think that's a communication gap, or is the system really skewed to where the driver is at a disadvantage?
So I'll go first. I think that if a driver gets burned one time on a bonus of any kind, it sticks with them regardless of the carrier. So it's up to the recruiting team, it's up to the orientation team, it's up to the operation team to all be marching down the same path. Make sure the message is exactly the same from start to finish. So it's super important to have meetings with your operations team, orientation team, and recruiting team. And then we don't have a sign-on bonus, we have a referral bonus. And that's because when we've tried to implement a sign-on bonus, we've seen negative results. The drivers don't really pay attention to it because they don't feel like it's attainable. And that's more like what they consider their mad money. They want to know what their base pay, what they're guaranteed going to make every mile they run.
Do you get driver buy-in on what they feel like is attainable? Like, do you set a goal and then, kind of do a temperature check before you fully roll it out?
We do. We survey the drivers. We have a driver board that we talk with, go through different things. So we just recently implemented a holiday pay increase. And with that, we started getting feedback from WorkHound on our holiday pay is bad. We need it. And we knew from the NTI surveys our holiday pay is lower than other carriers in the industry. So when we made that jump, we tested it out with them to say, okay, what do you feel? Because we want them to feel engaged, we want them to feel empowered, and that they matter in their opinion, because their opinion is what's going to help us grow and continue to hire drivers.
Sergey, same question. Is it really just come down to a communication gap, or is there a fundamental trust issue there?
It's kind of a little bit of both, but first I want to say that I couldn't agree more regarding the surveying of the drivers. It's really a beautiful thing when you can survey your drivers regarding a policy you're considering passing, and then once the policy goes through, you show your drivers, your fleet, here, here's how you guys voted, here's how we made the decision as a result. That's just an awesome retention tool, I would say, that is everyone should be utilizing. It's very easy to do. But regarding sign-on bonuses, as you may know, YouTube is one of the biggest, most common places for drivers to go now to do research on carriers. And I do research on this all the time. If you go to the bigger YouTube channels, if you go to places like Smart Trucking, Trucking Answers, a bunch of other channels where the drivers trust, sign-on bonuses have a really bad reputation across all of these people. And they would all say, if a company is offering a sign-on bonus, it must be for a reason that's not really good. And whether or not that's the truth, perception matters more than the reality. So if you have a policy that's fair, but if it's not perceived as fair, then you may as well not have the policy. It's the same thing with the sign-on bonus. I see more detriment to the image of a company when you're deciding to have a sign-on bonus. So even if you are having more clicks on your Facebook ad, for example, because you're offering a bonus, at the end of the day, it's hard to measure how many drivers are just not considering you at all just because you have that in there, I would say.
Leah, based on your conversations with the base of your survey, does it seem like that the sign-on bonus or the retention bonus is one of those things that's just kind of here to stay, or do you see it starting to fade? I still see it advertised fairly heavily, but it doesn't seem like I don't see it as often as I used to.
Oh, sign-ons and referral bonuses are not going away. They are what started this pay cycle in Q3 of 2020. And that's, anytime that fleets start to feel difficulty attracting drivers, it's the first response. And that's primarily due to a legacy trend in the industry, right? We have a lot of legacy leaders, and most folks feel that sign-on bonuses are absolutely necessary. I'll tell you, referral bonuses are 195,000 million times necessary, so you should absolutely have those and keep those much stronger than a sign-on bonus. They're much more effective, and your referrals will stay longer, they're happier, and they have a built-in mentorship in the driver that referred them. So absolutely, referral programs are here to stay. But we haven't seen a decrease in sign-on bonuses, certainly. In fact, they've been trending up since Q3 of 2020, not only in volume, but also in number. But in terms of the engagement point, I just want to add that surveying drivers and getting their feedback is absolutely crucial. They want to provide feedback, and they want to be part of the team, and they are part of the team. In fact, they are the face of your team, and their feedback is crucial. Feedback, though, and surveys is not the end of engagement. Driver engagement is a culture decision. And when we talk about driver engagement, it's not getting their opinion or getting their feedback on a program. It's actually reaching out and providing the outcomes of the KPI performance, the outcome in their paycheck. And there's some standout companies that do a really good job and have utilized technology to pair the KPI performance, the paycheck outcomes, and put the data all together to stay regularly in contact with the driver in the truck, again, by way of their app, with technology, whether it's outsourced or built internally. But reporting those things and keeping your drivers tied into their total compensation, that's driver engagement.
Rachel and Sergey, how do you combat, I guess, poaching each other's drivers? I mean, Leah had mentioned that, the lower the pay, the higher the turnover. So when does it become, I just perpetually have to raise my pay because somebody's always coming to steal my drivers? I'm going to go to 62 cents a mile. Rachel's going to go to 64, and you're going to go to 66. So how do you kind of break that cycle to where, fair pay or you finally meet that benchmark of adequate pay?
I would say that besides CPM, it's really important that drivers understand if they are in fact being paid for all their time or for most of their time, how much of their time they're being paid for. So if you're getting 64 CPM as opposed to 62, but you're not getting the detention pay that you should be getting, for example, or border crossing pay or other types of pay that you're expecting, it's not necessarily true that just because a carrier is offering 1 or 2 more CPM to my current driver, that this driver is going to leave. At least in my experience, but it's important then to remind your drivers exactly what it is that they have in a sort of a polite and very kind of a sneaky way without being too forward about it. But here's what we've added in the past month to your benefits. Here's what keep reminding your drivers what it is that they have, and give your drivers a sense of if they leave the company, they're losing something special. That's important because just adding pay and then announcing it one time and forgetting about it may not be enough. It's good to keep reminding your drivers that this place is good, not just because we're paying this much money. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we look at our employment verifications. So when we get an employment verification on a current driver, we look at the carrier that's requesting it and try to go apples to apples of what that carrier is offering versus what we're offering. That carrier may offer you 60 cents a mile, but you're going to be out 10 or 12 days where you're only out 5 to 6 with us. And that's where our retention specialist comes into play and engaging with the driver and the fleet manager. It's looking at where are they looking to go, why are they looking to go, identify that problem, and then continuing to celebrate the victories. So when you do make changes, don't just announce it one time. We have a monthly and a quarterly newsletter that we send out that's, we hear you, we're listening, and this is what we've changed. We've just started doing it this year, so we haven't done our annual celebration, but we want to remind the drivers the holiday pay, not just roll out one time. Let's continue to talk through it. We've raised our pay for all of our divisions. Our ICs, they've received 2 pay increases, our regional drivers, our local drivers. So continuing to celebrate the victories is the big part, and then making sure the driver fully understands the pay structure, because as Julie said earlier, sometimes they don't really understand the pay. So making sure they understand the bonus structure, the base pay. If you would have ran 200 or 400 more miles, you may have got a productivity bonus. So let's see how we can get you out of the house quicker, or how can we improve your productivity.
If I may,
both of you are talking about the recruiting process never ending. When you close the sale on a driver and they join your company, that process hasn't ended. It's only just begun for them. You have to regularly remind them why they chose you, what they like about you, what their friends like about you, why they stay, why they should continue to stay. That's what drowns out the noise of Milan from GP Transco's drivers and vice versa, right? Regularly reminding them what's fabulous about your company and what you're doing for them regularly, along with applauding what they are doing for you and their country on a daily basis.
Is there a preferred format is it a phone call, is it a text, is it an email, is it a newsletter? How do you communicate that regularly with your drivers?
I didn't bring that slide, but it actually depends on the age of the driver. We currently have 4 generations of folks working in the industry right now, and depending on the age of the individual is going to be what they want to hear from you. I have listeners on SiriusXM that the minute I get on the air, they are texting me, and when I'm off, et cetera, they're sending messages on social media, et cetera, as to what they want to talk about, but they would never call in, and they remind me that they would never call in. They're on what I would refer to in our younger drivers as the do not call list. But conversely, our older drivers do miss in-person communication. They miss lunches together. They want a phone call. They get annoyed when they get an email. They don't want you texting them. They want to engage in person. So I'm going to be the person that's going to say you have to do it all. You have to pinpoint all of your different avenues and channels to make sure that you're touching everyone.
Driver preference. So you have to do that on the front end. We've started talking through with the drivers, what is your preferred home time? What is your preferred way of communication? So that we're able to pair them up throughout the whole journey. Are they paired up with the right recruiter? Is the recruiter meeting their needs because they want to communicate via text or via phone and they may not have an email address? And then that carries on through the whole journey of being with Milan. Is do they want to get communication via Qualcomm? Do they want it on their inbox, so their emails? Do they want text? Do they want us to pick the phone up? And then we're able to identify then who needs to receive what. But we also do mass communications regardless when it's company information and whatnot to everybody via text, email, phone call, and then social media.
Yeah, for us, the two main ways to communicate with our drivers, and this would be more specifically for retention and for sort of spreading the information about what we recently added, to their benefit structure and whatnot. So when it comes to mass emails to all of the drivers, a lot of the time, that's a really good way to send out a case study about a specific, let's say, GP Transco driver whose case may apply to the rest. So, for instance, we recently sent something out about, we had this driver and he was promised this type of sign-on bonus and this kind of astronomical CPM by a 1099 carrier, which we're not. And this person left the company. 2 months later, they decided it's not all that. They wanted to come back, but at that point, we were out of trucks for the next 2 months. So the driver was, pretty disappointed. So things like that are good to send out via email. But what I'd really recommend carriers do, and we've implemented this about 4 years ago, is have a closed Facebook group just for your drivers. So a place where drivers can basically join right after orientation. It's not open to the public, and that does a few things. One of the things is it's just a good place for your drivers to share best practices with one another. Another place is it's a good place for your drivers to vent. So if a driver is upset about something, we'd rather they go and talk about it to fellow drivers in the group instead of going on Google.com, Googling GP Transco, and leaving a review. So that's a way to do that. But also, if you have somebody from driver relations in that group as well who can kind of see the patterns and trends of what people are talking about, what your drivers are saying, respond to them, and then also bring this information back to management in order for you to use that as a study tool. That way you can make appropriate changes based on what your drivers are saying. And at the same time, when you're addressing their questions, you're showing drivers in that group that you are, you can see, you can understand what they're saying, you see what they're saying, that it's not falling on deaf ears. So closed utilization of social media is actually super powerful, in my opinion, for that sort of thing.
Is somebody from the management side a member of that group, and do you police comments? Like if somebody makes a negative comment, which I'm sure there's negative comments, how does the management side respond to that?
So out of management, I'm on the executive team and I'm in that group. I've sort of been able to somehow earn the trust of drivers as being an outsider myself. I didn't come from trucking originally, so I came into the industry and to our drivers as somebody like, teach me, about different things. So I've been in the industry for about 4 years. So that means that I can speak with our drivers fairly openly, and if they are saying something that's unreasonable, it's okay to point it out directly in the group, for example. And what ends up happening is other drivers who agree with what it is that I'm saying sort of balance it out. But there is no censorship in these things. It's really kind of let people be, let people speak, unless there is some kind of a physical threat or something, extraordinary. But I think key is let people be themselves and talk openly. And a lot of the time, there's no need to intervene, because if a driver has a misunderstanding about something, 12 other guys are going to come in and they're going to balance it out and explain it, and it resolves itself, sort of. So it's kind of a it kind of maintains itself sometimes.
The other alternative that fleets utilize is having a driver advisory board, like we talked about before, and having a member from that board be the moderator in the group. But in general, just know that negative feedback isn't necessarily a bad thing. And the freedom to talk about the troubles of the job and what doesn't work well for everyone at the company is also a beautiful thing. Allowing them the time and the space to talk with their peers and to have another peer give positive feedback about something that didn't work out for them actually does a really strong job in retaining folks at your company as well.
And that's something I would like to add to is embrace the negative comments or the neutral comments, because it's identifying, was there a lapse on the recruiter side? Is there a misunderstanding on operations side? Is there a misunderstanding with payroll? Those are the little golden nuggets that you need to make slight adjustments. And again, going back to what Julie shared, it's the little things and becoming consistent that'll be the win.
If I may add also, just something I've realized over time. So when we're speaking with our drivers, if it's in writing or if it's in a video addressed by me and our CEO, for example, it's really important to not dumb down your message whatsoever. Basically, speak to your drivers as equals in terms of if there's complicated reasons behind why you decided to have a certain policy, go ahead and explain that in depth, and as opposed to kind of thinking this is too complicated and might go over people's heads. Really go in and make sure your drivers understand that if they were in your position, they would probably have done the same thing. So that's really important in terms of the way I think communicating with your drivers on all these platforms that we're discussing.